This is John Groves coming to you from my home studio. Today's Bible talk is on the Council of Jerusalem. This is an account related in the book of Acts of the Apostles, chapter 15, a very interesting story about the life of the early church. Today, I'd like to try things just a little bit differently. You'll notice I'm not going to be reading from a prepared script. I'm going to try cut down to the essentials and not dwell on too much of the minutia that might otherwise burden the presentation. So what was this situation all about? Well, you may recall from early history of the Christian church that the missionary, the evangelization that was taking place was quite successful among the Gentiles. And there was a faction of Jews converted to the faith who felt that to be a good Christian, you also had to follow the laws of Moses. So this dispute centered on the question of, do the new Christians, who are otherwise from foreign lands and subject to different customs, obligated to follow the laws of Moses, in particular, the requirement for males to be circumcised. In the case of the Jewish people, they do it when the male infants are only 8 days old. So it's a little different than if you were in your 20s or 30s and wondering about why is this necessary? So the people who were carping about this decided that, no, you got to do this. And new churches being formed in Asia Minor and throughout the Roman Empire decided, well, we're not so sure this is wise. So let's send some people to Jerusalem, and they selected Paul and Barnabas to plead their case that, this really wasn't essential as far as they were concerned. The gospel had plenty of challenges in and of itself. So the meeting took place in Jerusalem. Paul and Barnabas were welcomed warmly, and they had a chance to share on the success of their missionary efforts. But then the Judaizing faction said, these new converts have to follow the laws of Moses, and they have to get circumcised. And that led to extensive debate on the question. And Peter was one of the people who got up and spoke to the group and said, you selected me to be the person who would manage the conversion of Gentiles. And as far as I'm concerned, this is just too heavy a burden to bear. We were never really able to do it ourselves as Jews, so why should we insist that Gentiles do it? And after some discussion, James, who was then the head of the church, spoke to the matter and said, okay, I've decided that we really don't need to burden the Gentiles with these requirements. It'll be enough if they abstain from meat offered to idols, animals that are strangled, and also fornication. You've got to try to preserve some practices that will individualize us and make us stand apart from our pagan counterparts. And that might have been the end of the matter, except that the undercurrent of dissension and the pressure to adhere to the laws of Moses continued. It even led the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, to write, I'm just upset with these people. And if they feel so strongly about circumcision, they should take it to the max and they should go castrate themselves. So there you have it. It's part of our textual legacy. You'd think that might have resolved matters, but it didn't. Paul felt compelled to have Titus and Timothy, two of his Gentile companions, circumcised, and they agreed to do that. And also there were problems and criticisms raised about whether the Gentiles were following the dietary restrictions that were laid out in this council decree. So there was never really a whole lot of peace on the subject, but at least there was a big step forward in that circumcision was not going to be a stumbling block for the Gentiles being converted to the then new Christian faith. I have a painting I'd like to share with you. This is actually a modern day painting, but it's made to look like an old Byzantine icon. You can see in the center the figure of St. James. You can identify his sainthood by the halo. And then to his right, also with a halo, is Peter. And to his left, on our right, is Paul. He's always seems to be shown bald. Anyway, on the table, you see indications of Jewish ritual practices, a menorah, a scroll, and in his left hand, James is holding what essentially becomes the terms of the decree, the resolution of this dispute. And in the background, you have the church elders and apostles who had considered the matter. And at the top, there's a legend about this council in Jerusalem in Hebrew. The figure of St. James is actually wearing an omophorion. It's that white stole. It shows 3 crosses here, but ordinarily it has 4 crosses. And it's worn as a symbol of office as a bishop in the Orthodox Church. And it represents the office of the Good Shepherd, looking after the lost sheep, because the stole represents the sheep that they carry on their shoulders. This is a painting that is hanging in an Orthodox church in the Middle East, possibly in Gaza, but I'm not sure of the whereabouts. The source for my painting was an Italian language website from a traveler who shared some of his experiences with it. Metaphysically, there is no entry for the Council of Jerusalem. There is an entry for Jerusalem as a place of peace. And certainly Jerusalem played a significant role in the history of ancient Judaism and even early Christianity, and later, of course, with Islam. But during our time, for people inclined to discern the metaphysical meaning, we can focus on the notion of a council as a mechanism to bring people together and create some prospects of unanimity. We can be thankful that these early Christians were so disposed that they were able to resolve the matter among themselves without the factions themselves drifting off and creating splinter movements. That was to come later with the Reformation and other divisions that occurred in the church, including the division between the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox churches. Perhaps the highlight that I want to emphasize in terms of a metaphysical interpretation is that we should follow and be inclined to follow the dictates of our conscience and not necessarily some outwardly prescribed ritual, because a ritual can be empty in and of itself. It demonstrates no significant commitment to the tenets of faith or to the way of life that faith calls upon us to carry out. So I leave you with that observation that St. Paul was able to essentially minister to his new converts, indicating that you're not required to follow these rules, but if they offend others, be sensitive to that and perhaps not practice things that cause offense. But otherwise, there's nothing inherently wrong with eating meat that may have been offered to idols. So some might say that was heresy, didn't stand in compliance with the decree, but it also showed that there was a new liberty, a new freedom in this nascent movement that we refer to as the Christian church. And so we're thankful that we have this legacy and that it acts as a beacon for the enlightenment of future generations. Until next time, this is John Groves signing off.